story, unlike all my other stories, is not about my genitals. It's about regret. So like in 1975, the Ramones came out, and they essentially defined the punk music scene. And in 1996, a chubby, awkward Indian kid was introduced to Green Day, and his life was forever changed. So I used to live in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, which is a rural podunk town. My parents took me out there because my dad was working on an oil rig, and they believed that was the safest place where I would have no bad influences. Little do they understand that podunk towns in Mississippi are not the storybook type of places. They're weird. So my next door neighbor, his name was Clint Hagler, and he had a big brother who was a bad influence. Well, looking back at it, he smoked cigarettes, he wore leather jackets that were studded, and they were covered in punk emblems. And I would hang out with Clint all the time, and his big brother would hang out with us. And one day he came up and he's like, "Hey guys, listen to this." And he puts on Green Day's Dookie, and he plays Longview. And the introduction bass track to that album blew my mind. And just for clarification, before this point, my parents were your typical conservative Indian family. I was not allowed to listen to the radio. I was only allowed to listen to songs that came out by Disney and Bollywood soundtracks. So my perspective of music was completely skewed, and so I was just like, this music is amazing. And like the lyrics made sense. And for the first time in my life, I was like, something defines me and it's not negative. Living in Mississippi, one of the first things people always noticed and commented on was that I was brown or Indian. I remember this one guy, I can't remember his name because he's completely useless to me, said to me, he's like, "Hey man, are you a Prince and do you own a 7-Eleven? And I was like, I don't know if you understand how currency works, but princes don't normally run gas stations. But that's like a quick synopsis about my life in Mississippi. And from that point on, my friend Clint and I, we were listening to punk every day. We got really into it. And my family and I, we moved back to Houston when I was in 8th grade and 9th grade. And I met everyone else. I met a bunch of people that were really into punk, and we got really into it. It was kind of annoying, and I was really pretentious about it. I judged other people if they didn't know the punk bands I knew, even though I scoured the internet looking for punk bands that were not in my city, and then I judged them harshly for not listening to what I listened to. But it got really bad. We wrote zines that talked about the bands that you should be listening to, but we passed it around 7 people that had comics, and we also judged the journalism club, and that was our big, fight the man, fight the patriarchy, by judging harshly other high schoolers that were just also terrible writers. And our big claim to fame is we passed around mixtapes that we made where we recorded off of other mixtapes, and it got really, really bad in quality, because that's how cassette tapes work. And we called it the Social Distortions, which we thought was super clever. I listened to punk all the time, and my family was like, we need to go to India. You need to visit your family. You're kind of changing. You need to get back in touch with your culture. And I was like, okay, that sounds normal. That's cool. But I also took 200 CDs because I was like, I'm not going to talk to anybody there because I was an asshole. And that's actually what I did. I met up with my cousins who were all around the same age as me, but I had a hard time connecting with them. They didn't listen to the music I listened to. They really were into Bollywood. They thought the concept of love was weird and alien, and they didn't understand why people would do that. And I didn't understand why people would have arranged marriages and wear loincloths. No, they actually, they wore, little things. They're called dhotis. They're essentially a loincloth. I remember, my grandfather would always try to talk to me, but I was kind of a dick, and I didn't talk to my grandfather. This was a man that, essentially, I've met 2 other times in my life, and my mom's like, he's your grandfather. He's my father. You should respect him and listen to him. He has a lot to say. He was, a really important man. And I was like, whatever. He works for the government. Fuck him. And it was really bad. I looking back at it, I felt really bad. But at that time, I was I was reading Karl Marx, and I thought I was this enlightened kid that no one understood. So my grandfather passed away in 2011. It was actually January 18th of 2011 is when my grandfather passed away. And my mom called me up, and I was living in Africa at the time, and she's like, your grandfather is on his last legs. This is not a surprise. He's an old man. He's 88 years old, and his body is failing. Can you come? I know, like, you're living in Africa. And I was like, at that time, I didn't know how to tell my mom because I was technically under house arrest because I had a hit put out on me. So I could not leave the country because I was being guarded. So I was unable to go to my grandfather's funeral. And a couple of months ago, I went back to India for the first time since 2006. And I realized why people wanted me to talk to my grandfather. And I really regret not listening to him. So my grandfather was a freedom fighter. He worked alongside Mahatma Ghandi in procuring the freedom for India through nonviolent means. And so it was really touching to find out that my grandfather and I actually had a lot in common. He was anti-establishment. He was taking down a large governmental organization through peaceful means and nonviolence and protest. Something that I honestly would have really liked if I listened to him, but I didn't take the time at the moment. And I also found out that my grandfather was an editor of the Rebellion magazine, a Rebellion newspaper. So essentially, he was writing zines about like where to free yourself and how to boycott and where to boycott. And he was a wanted man by the British government. And I never gave him the chance. And that's my biggest regret, because my grandfather's probably the most punk rock person I would have ever known if I gave him the moment. So my whole thing now is like, live in the moment and appreciate the people that are around you, because you never know how their history can affect your future. Thank you.